Well, I'd like to now invite John Bangs, the former head of education at the NUT, to speak about Steve Sinnott, in whose name the Sinnott Fellowship was established.
Can I thank everyone here today for what has been a wonderful project. Just to say what I'm doing very briefly, I've stopped being head of education and I'm visiting professor at the Institute of Education and working at Cambridge University on developing a teacher leadership project. More anon on that. A word about Steve. The fellowships were based on Steve's concept. Steve Sinnott was General Secretary of the National Union of Teachers up until 2008. He died very suddenly and tragically, and it was completely unpredicted. And the response of the then government was to actually offer something in his name which would, in a sense, expand the concepts and the approach of schools out of, in a sense, schools being seen as simply concerned in a bunker with their own interests and their own concerns. He was a very outward-facing General Secretary, a very generous man, and he was committed to young people nationally and internationally. And in a sense, the awards perfectly complement his vision. And Steve and I and many of my colleagues were and are committed to the concept of schools as communities and being integral to their communities, and that actually every parent wants a good local school for their children. More than anything else, they want a good local school, and something which is much more than an exam factory, but is about a very strong, powerful and supportive community. And Steve was also committed to teacher leadership in schools, absolutely committed. And nowhere was that more obvious to me. As Assistant Secretary, I used to organise the National Education Conference at the NUT, when Tim Smith and Marcia Clack, Radhika and Sarah Bubb came to speak at our conference in July. Because what absolutely demonstrated to every single person in that audience, and it's the same with all the Sinnott Fellows, is that essentially it's not only about the Fellows not only having a concept about their schools as community and being outward-facing, but actually every single Fellow has shown genuine and real leadership within the context of their schools. It's creative leadership, it's innovative leadership. Well, why outward-facing? And I think the key issue has been answered before. But the question is, can schools do it all? Now, John Macbeth, Maurice Galton, and I have just done a book called Reinventing Schools, and there was all sorts of publicity about the ex-head of the QCA's curriculum section saying the exam boards were diseased and corrupt. We got lots of publicity for that. But the most important chapter within it, for me, is the question of can schools do it all? And there's a fascinating section, and I don't know if Jackie's here today. Is Jackie Barnes here today? Oh, it's nice to see you, Jackie. Tower Hamlets is my alma mater, as you know. My entire professional career as a teacher was in Tower Hamlets. And Alistair MacDonald, is Alistair? I don't think Alistair's here, is he? Yeah. Alistair MacDonald gave me a fantastic interview for the book, and he nailed exactly why the Sinnott Fellowships were absolutely vital. He said, the whole thing is about educational capital. It's incredibly important. That's what we need to provide in addition to the classroom. We've got to give young people all the things that you know our society values and which middle-class families provide for their children. And actually what the Sinnott Fellowships do, and there are enormous policy implications for the future on this, what the Sinnott Fellowships do is create educational capital for those children who don't have it. You can call it social capital, you can call it cultural capital. They're exactly the same thing. And I was really hit by a very, very interesting comment from Jo Dibb, who is another wonderful head who is in charge of Elizabeth Garrett Anderson School, when she argued at our National Education Conference, and this is very interesting because Sarah Bubb's evaluation of the Sinnott Fellowship says exactly the same thing. She argued that an outward-facing school is essentially a standards issue. It is fundamentally a standards issue. Very interesting, actually, it's the first recommendation in the evaluation. Outward-facing activity has significant benefits in enhancing attainment and raising aspirations in enhancing attainment. Why? Because if you're a kid who has a family that never looks at books, for example, in a sense, the whole cultural basis and the social basis of your family is one which is just focusing on a very narrow set of areas, and you come to school, you might do fantastically in your examinations. But if you're not armed with the social capital to go out there and use your qualifications, then you're not going to do well in later life. So it is fundamentally a narrowing the gap issue. And that's why it is a cross-party issue as well. And I don't think that the Sinnott Fellowships in any way, shape or form are anything other than a major policy implication for the coalition government. I just want to say something a little bit about teacher and staff leadership. One of the most interesting things in terms of the teacher leadership project, which I'm doing at Cambridge University, is that the discourse about teacher leadership is all about distributed leadership, and that principals are involved in distributing leadership to their teachers. Now, I think absolutely distributed leadership is a way it's gone, but actually way it should go. But actually, the amount of research that's being conducted on the nature of teacher leadership itself is very small indeed. How do teachers create the spaces, in a sense, created for them within a distributed within a school with distributed leadership? What do they use that capacity for, etc., etc.? And I'm very, very interested in actually building a group of teachers that can explore this area. And it would be great afterwards, actually, if any colleague, any fellowship, any fellow is interested, if you can see me afterwards, I'd like to put together a list and put together a group that we can continue this discourse about the nature of teacher leadership. I think finally I'm going to finish by saying that actually the Sinnott Fellowships are not about the complicated delivery of a children's services bureaucracy. They are about schools in terms of their communities. And you can call it a big society, you can call it schools at the heart of their communities. But whatever you call it, as I say, it does cross parties. And the reason why it crosses parties is that all schools are in essence outward facing. And in a sense, Lucy was talking about the legacy. For me, the legacy is this. The legacy is that whatever the status of the school, whether it's an academy, or dare I say it, even a free school, or whether it's a community school or a foundation school, you can't escape the fact that schools are a centre of their communities. And what we have with the two cohorts, and I do hope we go through to the third cohort for the Sinnott Fellows, is an enormous body of evidence that actually schools do make a massive difference, not only to their communities, but also to the social capital of children's lives. Big policy implications for the coalition government, and I hope we take those implications forward. Thank you.